some updated findings that we've had in what has now been round 2 of our research. So we'll begin by covering an overview of what we've discovered here as our framework for a tech cluster for the Midwest. Then we're going to go into survey data. One of the big aspects from what we learned in 2010, and everyone has been kind of tiptoeing around the tulips here in the Midwest on, is the brain drain. That we do educate a sizable amount of the American workforce, especially in STEM, but many of them do not choose to stay here after graduation. And we did survey students en masse from the University of Illinois. 20,000 students were surveyed, and that will be going across the Big Ten consortium in the fall. But findings from that, in addition to industry analyses covering 4 different industries, and then wrapping up with key findings and tangible recommendations for the city and region moving forward. So as I mentioned in 2010, we were tasked with coming up with a recommendation for the city of Chicago and for the region moving forward. And at the time, our conclusion was that a successful research cluster within the Midwest should increase the regional GDP through fostering constructive relations between researchers and business, advancing industry through technological developments, establishing job opportunities, creating new companies, and augmenting established companies, and most importantly, linking proximate universities, hospitals, research, and business centers. Over the last several years, we've seen the development not only in Chicago but across the Midwest with initiatives such as 1871, with Matter, with the now UI Labs initiative that's beginning to take hold here to bring national recognition to the Midwest and to our region for the assets and resources that we do have here, and recognizing the global impact that the Midwest has, not only on innovation, but on the human element as well. So over the last 9 months, my colleagues and I have really been working on taking what has happened in the Midwest since 2010 and turning that into an updated version of our findings, looking this time around at, as I mentioned, 4 key industries and how we can attract and retain not only our talent, but our startups and emerging growth firms here in the Midwest as well. So the framework that we've used involves both startups and established firms, as well as the relations between universities and research centers, as well as government, given that each of them have a role in creating an ecosystem, whether it be Brad Bell or Carl Schramm or Steve Blank. Many individuals have pontificated on this matter for quite some time, and this is the framework that we've established to move forward for the Midwest. It really is going to be about creating linkages between proximate resources here, not only in Chicago, but across the region as well. So, as we've seen, one of the best metaphors for the Midwest is really the transportation network. We've seen it as a very diverse and patchwork quilt economy, and to its strength and sometimes as a challenge, it really does comprise natural hubs and spokes throughout the region, whether it be Chicago and Minneapolis and Indianapolis and St. Louis, or a Champaign, a Bloomington, Normal, and Ames, Iowa, and Madison. All of these cities have an important contribution to the economic development of the region, and it's important to make sure that all of them are part of this conversation moving forward, while also maintaining that the hub cities, such as Chicago, will take a leadership role in advancing the Midwest overall. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to discuss some of the findings from our entrepreneurship survey that went out to 20,000 University of Illinois students during the month of March, and some of their perspectives on entrepreneurship and innovation here in Chicago and in the Midwest.
Thank you. As Steve mentioned earlier this semester we created this 31-question survey looking at 3 key things across the University of Illinois body, which we're also planning on sending out to across the Big Ten. Those 3 key things were who were the students, so demographics, major, college, what year are you? Next, kind of your job preferences, so what industry are you going to go to? What's your goal industry? Along with kind of what are the attributes you look for when searching for industries. then finally, we looked into kind of their entrepreneurial leanings. So if they wanted to become an entrepreneur, what were the factors they wanted? Kind of what did they think about these different cities? And from that, we created this population where we got about 1,000 STEM students, along with very heavy undergraduate representation, and we also got a diverse amount of PhD professional program students. And along with that, as expected from the Illinois population, seeing as the University of Illinois is primarily people from Chicago, we get the heavy representation from Illinois. However, we also have a very strong international population from China and India, along with other states such as California and Texas. So the first question we looked at was kind of where are the students, so your hometown versus kind of your summer 2014 or full-time location. And the first graph looks at the total population. So this includes all majors, all years, and any kind of work status. So that could be anything from continuing education to internships to full-time. And as you can see, Illinois actually comes out positive on this with a 1.02 multiple. So for every one student from Illinois, 1.02 of those students stay here for stay here for work. However, West Coast are kind of more traditional, kind of what you view as a more established entrepreneurial hubs. Very, very strong with California with 2.1, along with New York at 1.8 and Washington at 9. Furthermore, we broke down this, kind of segmented it into kind of the STEM students that everyone's been kind of curious about lately. So we filtered it going to engineering, computer, information science students who are graduating in 2014. So aiming at the students who will be leaving for full-time work. And we found much different results than we found as an entire population. First off, Illinois is starting to become the deficit now, so only 0.91x multiple. And as you keep going farther, none of the international countries are able to retain the talent. But then the West Coast and California, Texas, Washington, New York, that's when their multiples start rapidly increasing. And from this, we got the conclusion that many students are here for internships, along with the continuing education. They're on campus for those summers. However, it's that final summer of senior year, going into when they're trying to find their full-time work, is when that transition happens from being in Illinois to choosing a new location. So key thing for Chicago, kind of a big opportunity for them is really working on that conversion rate of keeping this talent in the Midwest by converting them from the interns into full-time instead of having them leave after the internships. Next, we looked at kind of students' views on entrepreneurial cities. So the first question looks at a list of cities, and students were asked to see whether or not these cities are entrepreneurial, so yes or no. And from this, we got surprising results of Chicago is third, which is a very strong standing. Granted, it's all mostly Illinois students, so they're very familiar with the city. So that could skew the results a bit, and as we push this across the Midwest, we expect the results to change. However, they're the only trailing behind San Francisco and Austin, which is very good for Chicago because these are kind of preeminent entrepreneurial hubs already. And furthermore, Chicago actually passed New York and Boulder, which are the other two strong cities. And as we kind of investigate this even further, looking into the familiarity of the programs that students may have in these cities, Chicago ranks second, as expected, with a lot of Illinois population, but they rank second with a slight margin of slightly being second to San Francisco. However, what's notable is that there's a gap between Chicago to New York, along with New York to Austin, and then kind of bottoms out with Boulder going across. So as you notice here, there's San Francisco and Chicago are the ones as students that they know of. However, it starts decreasing as you go farther. And another key observation is that this graph is at 7. So there's an opportunity for students to learn even more. So they're still somewhat murky on kind of what's going on. They're not fully sure on what's happening. Maybe that's because of Champaign or somewhat isolated, or because there's the opportunity to PR. So if Chicago is able to really push forward that along with other Midwestern cities, you still have about 3 markers on there to really take over San Francisco. And as we talk about Midwestern Tech Cluster, it's important to realize kind of how the other Midwestern cities do. So right now, Chicago, St. Louis, and Nashville rank very high according to being entrepreneurial cities, according to the students. And in order to become the tech cluster, it needs to be more universal across all of the other cities. Because if there's only 3 leading, then it's not really a cluster, there's only 3 cities. So there's really got to be a network. Next, we looked into kind of factors in choosing startup locations. So as a student, what are you going to look for when you're choosing the location for your next startup? The top 3 were mainly business factors. So looking at access to capital, where am I going to get my money? Talent pool, where am I going to find my employees? And entrepreneurial support networks. So who's going to help me go through with this? As we noticed, as I stated earlier, mainly business factors over personal factors. So people were not as concerned with kind of the nice weather in the area, all my friends are here, so we can hang out. It's more just, can my company survive? And another important factor that we thought could potentially taint our results was the weather, seeing as there's a lot of Illinois students and it got quite cold this winter. However, it did not act as the strongest factor as we thought it would. It's relatively low. Furthermore, kind of a tricky aspect on here is location of friends and talent pool. So on here they're listed separately, or oftentimes those are one and the same. Because as an entrepreneur, you usually want to start your company with people you well know, so people you can trust, and many times those are your friends. However, they may not be all your friends in the sense that if I'm a computer science student, if my friends are all computer science, then hey, they can help me build this new high-tech company. However, if computer science and all my other friends are more sports and recreation, they may not be as helpful in building a new high-tech center. Next, we'll look at kind of how those factors we talked about last slide build into students' view on the Midwest as a whole. And the concerning point is that entrepreneurial support networks and access to capital were the two highest that students felt that need to be kind of fixed within the Midwest. And as we look back again, 2 of the 3 top ones for students in choosing location were access to capital and entrepreneurial support networks. Granted, this could be a PR problem or kind of a perception, just because we only have one school at this moment, and it's in Illinois, so we may not be as aware of what's going on in, say, Minneapolis. But furthermore, it still needs to be worked out and needs to be improved upon. So maybe that's kind of spreading news across the Midwest, or maybe just building out the infrastructure even farther. Next, we broke down even farther, looking at what students think could be enhanced in Chicago alone. So what surprised everyone was crime was number 1. And usually people get the shock face when this one goes up, but the big thing looking here is that it could be a large perception issue, because if you think about what you read on the news, or what are the articles that pop up, how many of them are successful, like happy stories, and how many of them are crime articles? Being from St. Louis, when I heard about Chicago news when I was back at home, it's mostly about business and the normal factors of things like, say, Grubhub, IPOing, that would be things I hear about in St. Louis. The closer I've gotten to Chicago, the more I hear about more of the city interactions. So as most of our students are from Chicago, it can be a very large perception issue with the news of hearing mostly crime, whereas Chicago and San Francisco are not inherently different when it comes to kind of crime and demographics. So it's worth noting that this could be a news issue more than it could be just an actual infrastructure issue. And furthermore, another interesting point is that many students feel that Chicago has the infrastructure already needed to develop a lot of entrepreneurial factors, such as the talent pool, related companies nearby, mentors, access to capital. Those key things that they noted earlier. I feel like Chicago has it, but there's these kind of soft factors that they should develop even farther. And next we're going to our 4 industries, which, as we noted earlier, we view these industries as kind of like promising for the Midwest, and really what the Midwest is strong at. And as we talk about farther, we go into kind of the key factors that apply to industries and kind of why they're so important. And now I'll pass off to Jacob to talk about biotechnology.